Hi. Just over this last year, I had joined an internet forum for pretty much the first time. It's the first one I ever really was an active part of. And there's this thread that we use to talk about games we're recently playing, and I would use it mostly as an excuse to write up a little overview, a little bit of a review of whatever game I just recently beaten at the time, or tried to beat, or recently played, or any of these things. Games I'd been playing, basically. So I collected a couple of them here, just because I think they'd be useful to have in a video format. If someone wants to simply turn this on to listen to me talk about some games that you may or may not have played, it's a good excuse for something like that. Just some nice long form content to just kind of listen to. So to start with, the first time I had really done this in a proper way was with the game Eco, which I actually had bought from someone off of the forum. It was for $15. So this is on August 23rd. This is my review of Eco. Just finished Eco last night. I get the feeling people tend to play this game mostly for its ending segments. It might also be more manageable in consecutive playthroughs, but that game really managed to make 5 hours feel like 30. Much more of a slog than I was expecting or that I had heard about. Directionless puzzles that mostly amount to finding the right ledge or ladder tucked away and blended into a dark corner of a room. AI that needed you to stand in the exact right spot to know you wanted it to go up the ladder rather than walk circles around it. Inconsistent detection for when you try to interact with something, so the game never really knows if you meant to pick up a bomb or light it with a stick that's seconds away from losing its flame. I'm all for games being unfun for artistic purposes, which this game absolutely does do deliberately at times, and I do appreciate, but I also get the sense these complaints I have weren't intended to be as clunky as they are. Incredible ending sequence though, really. In the end, I'm glad I picked it up, and I'm glad I had the experience of playing something like this as close to blind as possible, but I don't know. Like I said, maybe it'll get better with more playthroughs. I could definitely see this being the kind of game you pick up every now and then just to bathe in the atmosphere and the aesthetic, once you know the solution to all the puzzles. So that's a very short one. Like I said, that's an August 23rd, which that was pretty soon after I joined the forum. I think I joined it towards the middle or towards the end of the summertime. So 23rd of August, I would have still been pretty new to the forum at that point. The next day, August 24th, last night. Okay, I'm reading ahead a little bit. So last night, so on August 23rd as well, I had played Eco. Or no, of course I played Eco. I played Journey, because it was my friend Griffin's birthday, and we were just kind of talking about how much he liked Journey, and so for his birthday, he got me Journey. To play on. You got me a version on Steam. So I played that on, I guess, the night of August 23rd. And I wrote this up on August 24th. And actually, there's a lot of spoiler tags here. So I'm going to clear those out so that I can read it in one smooth go here. Okay. So August 24th, here's my review of Journey. And I posted it as a reply to that Eco post, mostly because it was the day after, and also because sometimes I refer to it during this review here. August 24th, Journey. In direct opposition to me finishing Eco the other day, I've just last night played and finished Journey as well. Hot take? Anyone ever say this game is good before? Because dang! Like Eco, I went into this blind, save for what little screenshots or vague words on the wind I've heard throughout the years. Not that Journey really has much to spoil in the base gameplay itself, but not even knowing what kind of experience Journey is led me to being very surprised and deeply moved with how much is said with so little, which the developers trust entirely in the hands of its players without basically any guidance at all. For this reason, I'll be spoiler tagging my experience and thoughts going forward in case anyone else was lucky like me to have made it this far without really knowing what Journey is, and does still plan to play it someday. The rest of this post is basically just me writing up my entire experience with the game, since it impacted me so profoundly, and I can't imagine talking about it without detailing all the little ups and downs I went through personally. Too long didn't read, the legends are true, this game owns. Just to preface, what I did know about this game going in was this. It's pretty, there's some kind of multiplayer thing somehow, and it makes people cry. Nothing more and nothing deeper than that. I didn't know the extent of the multiplayer, how many people it could support, if the multiplayer was opt-in or if it could work perfectly well as a single-player game. I prefer single-player games 95% of the time. I really knew nothing of it at all. So, when I got to the first area and I saw another player, I played around with them, exploring and learning to fly with each other, that kind of thing. As with most people, I was really bad at flying, by the way. This other person showed me a lot of patience, though, and a lot of playfulness. To put it mildly, we both liked chirping quite a bit. I eventually started making my way through to the progress point, and it seemed like this other player was hanging back. I figured they were just sitting around in this area all night to hang out with whoever showed up. Made sense to me. I continued on by myself, assuming that's normal behavior for this game. Early into this next area, I had to deal with some in-real-life stuff, so I was away from the controller for a couple minutes. Imagine my surprise when I come back and see another player chirping and waiting for me. I'll admit I was a little annoyed. I had in my mind that this game would be really nice just to slowly stroll through and soak in the environments. It was nice playing around with that other person in that closed-off space that seemed intentionally designed for multiple people, but ahead of me was this large, open vastness dotted with interesting little ruins and features. To me, that's a huge invitation to take things slow and explore things thoroughly. Under the watch of the second person, though, I felt a little more compelled to just go straight to the next objective so they wouldn't be annoyed with me. They obviously wanted my company. They had just stood around for several minutes waiting for me to come back. So we progressed forward, and I'm still pretty clumsy at flying. Again, though, this person showed patience and would run back to me if I ever fell back too far behind. This time we interacted with the endpoint cutscene at the same time. I noticed the position of my character was no longer centered in the little circle of light that bookends each area, but now was a little to the side to make room for the second player. The cutscene ends, and I find the same player still next to me, finishing up the cutscene just a little after me. This didn't happen the other time either. In any case, I waited for them to finish as they once waited for me, and we continued like this until reaching the tunnels. Beautiful area, but you don't need me to tell you that. This is when things got a little personal for me. At this point in the game, there's been no real opposition or enemies or anything, so when those serpent monsters showed up, I assumed they were essentially just decoration to make the world feel more lived in. Running ahead of my companion, I went directly into the path of one of the serpents and got sent flying across the room. What caught my attention more than my character sailing through the air is how my companion immediately pivoted and came to where I landed. They stood by me as my character struggled to get back up, once again just waiting for me. I started thinking about how they didn't really need to. If they wanted, they could just continue through the game. Either I would catch up eventually, or we would just go our separate ways. They waited for me, though. I started to feel like they cared about me. We continue on together, with my character once again making room for my partner to enter the cutscene at the same time as me. At this point, I'm getting better at flying, or more accurately, I'm realizing it's not about getting better, but being in sync with the other person you're flying with. I'm not getting better at flying. Me and my partner are getting more familiar with each other and figuring out a pattern that works between us. It's not about me, it's about us. This comes to a head in the tower, where looking back we absolutely did not do this area the intended way. Me and my partner would stay mostly in the same spot and just keep boosting each other upwards. This would not have been possible between the two of us a few areas ago. We continue on together. The cutscene depicts me and my partner braving a harsh snowstorm. One of us has our heads up, the other down. I start worrying that one of us might not make it through this next part. Since I'm the main character and the game needs me to progress, I worry about my partner not making it through. Then I realize I'm no more of a main character than they are. I wonder if I've been the partner this whole time. I worry that I haven't been a very good partner. I worry that I might be the one that doesn't make it through. For anyone who's played this game before, this is probably the part you've been waiting for, the mountain. Me and my friend start trying to fly together, but even though we've gotten so good at it together, the oppressive winds keep forcing us back down. My friend keeps trying to fly anyways. I chirp a few times to let them know it's not worth the effort. Every now and then they keep trying. I always oblige, but I also always give up. I feel bad that between the two of us, I'm the one who always gives up on it. The serpents from the tunnel return. Now we have to hide under scattered pieces of debris to avoid detection from them. Our first attempt sends us both flying and both scrambling to find each other in the snow. During the second attempt, I notice the serpent seems to target the debris more than it targets us as individuals. I run out from under the debris in time to not get caught in the attack, but my friend doesn't. It's my turn to run to their side and wait for them to get back up on their feet. We continue together. As the storm thickens and it becomes harder to make a single step forward, me and my friend are still chirping at each other, encouraging each other to keep going. We continue on together. At the top of the mountain is a beautiful sequence that encourages you to start flying with your partner again. After all that time convincing my friend to stay grounded, we finally return to the air. It's quite a large area, though, and one way or another I wind up losing track of where my friend has gone. The path forward is very clear, and I'm actually half convinced that this is planned by the game designers, since they might want you to finish the game without another player. But instead of moving forward, just as my friend had done for me all this time, I find a spot on a rock next to a waterfall to sit and wait, hoping they eventually turn back up again. I have no idea how long it'll take, or if it will ever happen, but I decide right there and then that I will wait as long as I need to find my friend again. I sit, I wait, chirping to myself, wondering if they've moved on without me. That doesn't seem like something they would do, though. My friend wouldn't leave me behind. And after a few minutes, I was proven right. My friend starts floating up over the distant horizon, chirping like mad. It was weird seeing them so far away. We continue on together. As we walk through the final passageway, our chirps to each other become quieter and harder to see against the light slowly washing over the screen. To circumvent this, we start doing full chirps, since those make the player do a small little animation. At no point do we ever let each other feel like we're being ignored. And that's how the game ends. Me and this perfect stranger affirming to each other that we care about each other, which at that point hardly needed saying. No game has ever made me feel so genuinely cared for before. I don't think any game really could in the same way. This is me and another human being who have literally no reason to attend to each other. The game is perfectly playable single player. The only reason we stayed by each other's side so much is because we wanted to. So many games spend so much time making you take care of things, so to take part in the system where you are the one being cared for and can care back to your caretaker, it's a wonderfully beautiful and deeply intimate thing. At the end, the game revealed to me that I had only ever met one other person that whole play session. That Polish person. That's the username, is that Polish person. That person I had left behind in the first area was the same one who waited for me so many times throughout the rest of the game, and who I learned to wait for as well. It made me feel warm knowing my name was on their screen too. So, very unpleasant experience with Journey, obviously. Came away that one, a better person, I like to think. It's amazing when a game can really introduce that kind of thing to you in such a genuine and honest and human way. Up next is Dragon Quest V, shorter post, more similar to the Eco one than the Journey one. Less of a review, more me talking about, because I actually didn't finish this game. So this is less of a review and more me just kind of considering why I don't like it. Or why I don't like it as much as I want to. Might be a better way to phrase that. This is September 26th. September 26th, Dragon Quest V. Forgive me, forum name, but I feel I have sinned. I started playing Dragon Quest V a while back, and it's starting to feel like a chore, so I'm putting it down. It's curious to me, because everyone who really knows about Dragon Quest always says 5 is the best one, including Yuji Horii. But I don't really see what the appeal is. I'm apparently halfway through the game, and I've seen exactly 2 moments that were notable to me at all. Some spoiler tags here. Details on where I am and what I've seen. I've stopped just before the Water Ring dungeon, after getting Bianca back in the party. That scene of seeing her again and the scene of Papa's getting killed in the in-game battle HUD were my 2 standout moments. For the amount of time I've put in, I'm just not getting back what feels like an equal amount of narrative intrigue or satisfying gameplay. There's been incredibly few battles where the optimal strategy was to do anything besides just pressing the attack button, and having monsters join your party seems interesting until you realize it's totally random when one will. Plus there's that annoying mechanic where they just won't listen to you sometimes until their intelligence is high enough. If I wanted to play an RPG where my party members made stupid decisions outside of my control, I'd play Xenoblade Chronicles, and I do not want to play that game. Some of you may have caught on by now, just by seeing my post around the forums, that JRPGs are in fact my favorite genre, and archaic RPG design is nothing new to me nor something I inherently resent. But Dragon Quest V seemed to promise a lot and is not really offering anything other RPGs released around the same time haven't done better. Or, for that matter, anything earlier Dragon Quests haven't done better as well. More than anything, I'm just curious about what it is people see in this game that seems to grab them in a way that hasn't grabbed me. Every now and then I'll hear some cursory things about how cool some stuff towards the end of the game is, but there's an entire game between then and now, and it's not an especially fun or an interesting one. I don't know. I had to put down Dragon Quest VIII for a similar reason, which people also seem to really like. So maybe there's just something wrong with me. Yeah, so Dragon Quest V, a little disappointing. I don't think I would go as far as to call that a bad game. I don't think I could go as far as to call any Dragon Quest a bad game. But they go on for a really long time, and sometimes it's hard to kind of justify that length. So this is more recent now. That was back in September. Now we're jumping forward to December here. This is on the day that I received the Valis collection in the mail for the Switch. Got that imported from Japan because that's the only place it ever came out. I think there were plans to be like a digital English release, but that would be kind of strange because it's all the PC Engine versions of the games and those never had any English localization, but whatever. Point is, someone asked me, because I posted a picture of it. Every now and then you post some things on this forum about like things you get in the mail. So I posted a picture of that Valis collection on the Switch, as well as that PC Engine Mini that you can see on my shelf there. I posted that as well on the same day. They came in around the same time. So someone was asking me if the Valis collection was worth playing, because they're kind of on the fence about Valis. They never played it before and wanted to know if this was a good way to get started. So this is what I said in response, and it's basically a review, so I'm including it here. So this is December 12th, the Valis collection on the Switch. It's just called Valis collection. I don't know what you say on the Switch. It's because there's Valis on a whole bunch of Valis on the Switch. Well, it's certainly Valis. Only the PC Engine versions, though, which is fine because they're certainly the most playable, compared to something like the Cotton Reboot, which has both the remaster and the original X6... I've never had to say this out loud. The original X68000 version. They're different enough to warrant playing both, but in my opinion, the old PC Valis games are simply obsolete compared to their PC Engine remakes. Nothing at all of Valis 4, though. My assumption is that there may have been some trouble with the SNES version already being available on Switch Online, despite the fact that they almost certainly would have been using the PC Engine version for the collection. It's a shame, because I think the PC Engine Valis 4 is at least the second best Valis game, alternatively tied for first, with the first Valis game being in that top spot. All this to say, for a Valis collection, it's missing any version of Valis 4, which is definitely a loss, as well as any older versions of the three that are included, which I don't see as a problem, but somebody else might. That said, for the games that are included, there's a lot of love I didn't expect. Even on the box you can tell this is more of a historical preservation effort than a cash grab of just tossing some old games on the Switch cartridge. For all three of the games, there's their full high-res scanned manuals, a sound test mode to hear every track in the game, a menu to watch every cutscene, and some quality life features like save states and a rewind functionality, which is really nice. Valis games are a lot like Castlevania, or perhaps the other way around, where they feel really tough the first couple of times, but after learning enemy patterns and level layouts, it feels really good to breeze through. The rewind and save states make this a much more streamlined effort, since you can just focus on individual parts giving you any particular trouble. I think all retro games benefit from this to varying effect, but it's especially nice for Valis. Now, this would be a straight recommendation from me if not for exactly one thing. Valis Complete, a previous port job done in 2006, is perfectly available online as abandonware, which I'm actually going to put in the description for this YouTube video. This is all 4 PC Engine Valis games running natively on PC, no emulation, including scans of all their manuals as with the Switch port. The question then becomes how much you're willing to pay for convenience. There are no save states or rewind features here, and mapping a controller is annoying because in my experience, it doesn't seem to accept D-pads, and Valis with an analog stick is really gross. Personally, I know I enjoy the first 3 Valis games enough to warrant paying for a solid, convenient, easily accessible way to play them, but I'll always recommend Valis Complete to someone just trying them out for the first time. The Valis collection on the Switch is a great way to play, but if you don't need to pay, why bother? Valis Complete, play Valis Complete. Like I said, it's going to be in the description of this video. No reason not to get it. Perfectly legal, perfectly free. A couple downsides, like I said, you can't play with a D-pad. But just to test the waters, it's a great way to get started there on Valis, which I think are great. I think Valis 1 and Valis 3 are really, really good games, as well as Valis 4, of course, like I said. Valis 1 and Valis 4 in particular. I just think they're great games. I just think they're really, really good. I would rank them higher than I would rank most Castlevanias, I think. Anyways, next, so we're getting really recent here. This is just 4 days ago at the time of recording this. for a game called Bear's Restaurant. This might be the most obscure game I've been doing here. It's a pretty recent indie game. It got released this year. I won't talk too much about it, though, because this is similar to Journey, one of the longer posts I've made. So this is December 27th, Bear's Restaurant. Last night I played Bear's Restaurant after hearing Yoshiro Kimura talk about it with the game's creator. The way they talked about it made it seem like a pretty competent title, able to be mentioned in the same breath as Moon Remix RPG Adventure and Undertale. It's on sale now for 10% off, which isn't terribly much, but I figured it was enough to catch my attention in a mood to spend money after getting a few gift cards for Christmas. I figured $11.69 was a pretty good price for something that very well may wind up being my game of the year. Have you ever had a friend who would say stuff like, someday I'm going to make a game and it's going to be like X and Y, and it's going to have themes of A, B, and C, and just listening to this idea you can tell it's wildly unfocused, without an original bone in its body, and would absolutely not make a good game, but you patiently sit and listen to them talk about it anyways because you know this person also definitely does not have the skill or motivation to actually finish making an entire video game? Bear's Restaurant is what happens when someone like this actually does make that game they're talking about. Here's a game that really loves the idea of tragedy and empathy, but it doesn't really know how to express that, and it doesn't really understand why games that express them do so in the first place. The central conceit of Bear's Restaurant, for a while, is a restaurant run by a bear in the afterlife. People die, and they show up at this restaurant to eat something. It's always vague if this is some kind of cutting earthly ties situation, or if they're being consoled after dying, or anything along those lines. Bear's Restaurant seems to like all these ideas equally, and uses them pretty interchangeably for the needs of whatever particular mini-narrative is happening. You play as a cat, for a while, who works at this restaurant, taking orders and having the bear prepare the meals. Within the first few customers, I was already really confused by the tone of the game. The way I describe things so far makes it seem like a gentle, sensitive narrative about the beauty of human life, right? You can tell it's trying to be this, but for some reason the bear and the cat are really judgmental. The voice the author uses to characterize these two is weirdly aggressive and bitter, which is definitely supposed to be a joke, but it makes it incredibly difficult to get too invested in anything. This is a gigantic issue that permeates the entire game. The author is definitely a sarcastic type of guy, and therefore any and all humor in this game comes from people being just a little too rude to each other. The biggest mistake here is that this game tries to be funny like this almost more often than it tries to be anything else. It's a flavor that does not complement the crux of the story at all. Bear's Restaurant has a content warning around this time of the game, except it doesn't really explain what the warning is for. I'll similarly put a warning here, but actually list what's being mentioned. References to car accidents, suicide, assault, and gang violence. Playing as the cat waiter, sometimes a customer's order is too vague, so you'll have to dive into their memories of when they were alive to see exactly what they want. There is not a single one of these dive stories that are handled with any tact or honesty at all. Everyone is a cartoonishly exaggerated caricature of what someone who has no real experience with death assumes dying is like. A pregnant woman who just finished eating dinner goes outside and randomly gets hit by a car. An old man sitting on a chair in his living room, hearing his wife say it's almost time for dinner, all of a sudden has one or two dialogue boxes reflecting on how much his life has gone downhill, whips out a revolver the size of his head and shoots himself. A man freed from jail after a 15-year sentence, only to be met by yet another old man with a huge gun that blasts him for seemingly no reason. The only black man in the game, who, by the way, talks with a really thick accent and your cat character is visibly afraid of him for no particular reason, at one moment is fishing by a river, and the next is being hunted down by some gang members only to be, once again, shot to death. It's all so random and it happens so quickly. In a game centralized about learning about other people's experiences, it does an absolutely horrible job of relaying any kind of real humanity. It's just a flipbook of buzzwords that someone who obviously doesn't have very many lived experiences think would make people say, man, this is pretty heavy stuff. This is when something almost interesting happens. I'm jumping forward a bit, but I promise you're not missing anything. There's eventually a little demon guy who shows up and starts eating everything, saying it's hungry for despair. At first I rolled my eyes at yet more buzzwords that don't really mean anything, but then I thought about it a little more. Being hungry for despair, isn't that the reason you'd play a game like this? I just wrote an entire paragraph about how disappointingly underdeveloped the tragedies are. On some level, that's really fucked up, right? That I'm looking at how all these people lost their lives and saying, come on, this is ridiculous. I'm wanting something more, but in order to get that, I'd need to see longer stories about more tragedies that are actually rooted in some kind of reality similar enough to my own. How horrible! I'm the demon hungry for despair. Now that's an interesting character to have in a game. I wonder if it goes anywhere. It doesn't. The demon winds up being Flowey from Undertale. Some lines are taken nearly word for word from the end of that game, which I won't spoil in case anyone hasn't played it. It really is shameless how one-to-one this character is with Flowey. I cannot express enough how much they are perfectly identical. I was willing to give this the benefit of the doubt and say maybe Daigo and Toby Fox just happened to have similar ideas, but in that Yoshiro Kimura talk, and even in Bear's Restaurant itself, inside of the game, Daigo mentions how much of an influence Undertale was. He even goes as far as to say how annoyed he is by how many imitators have been popping up. Anyways, I could go on, but everything else I don't like about this game all stems from these issues that I've mentioned already. It's just a tactless game that doesn't really seem to understand why games like Moon or Undertale work the way they do. Someone said, I'm going to make a game like Moon Remix RPG Adventure and Undertale, and it'll have themes about death and humanity and empathy. But unlike the thousands of games like this people say they will make, this one actually got made. To nobody's surprise, it's not good. Oh, and also there's a part where you go to hell, and all the people going there are visibly impoverished. That sucks! And yes, it does. Very, very disappointed with this game. I mentioned earlier that when I bought it, I was expecting it to be my game of the year. I really did, because of the way Yoshiro Kimura and Daigo was talking about it on that talk they had. I'll link that in the description too if you guys are interested. It really seemed like this is going to be like the next kind of indie darling of like, oh wow, what a amazingly beautiful, intimately human game. But it's just really it uses a whole lot of words to say nothing at all, and the things that it does manage saying are things that are obviously not coming from any real place of understanding about anything. Yeah, of all the games I've talked about so far, this is the only one I would say is actually just a bad video game. It's the only one I would recommend to nobody. Right. Okay. So now, I have two posts here about one game. The game is Breath of Fire 3, which I actually just finished playing last night, and last night is also when I typed up this second part of my review of it. But this is a review in two parts. So I 25 days ago, on December 6th, I made a post on this forum after reaching one point in the game where there's like a time skip, so I assumed that was about halfway through the game. And I just kind of wrote down my opinions on the game so far. And then last night I gave kind of my final opinion after beating the entire game. So these next two segments are both about Breath of Fire 3, but they're nearly a month separated from each other. At one point is me halfway through the game, and the other is when I've completely beaten it. So this is December 6th, Breath of Fire 3. For the past week or so, I've finally been playing Breath of Fire 3, which I've had patiently sitting on my shelf for maybe 4 or 5 years by now. I've just gotten to the part in the game where there's a time skip forward by a couple years, which my experience with this genre indicates I'm approximately halfway through. This makes me feel like I've seen enough of the game to start speaking about it confidently, so I'm going to talk about it. The first thing that struck me with this game is the presentation. What a gorgeous game, huh? I knew the words Capcom RPG meant it was going to be incredibly stylish if nothing else, but I was really blown away at how beautiful the animations in particular are. I suppose it's worth mentioning that this is also my first time playing a Breath of Fire game in the first place. I've passively been aware of the general design sensibilities of these games just by seeing stuff online every now and then, but seeing it all in motion is really something. I just love looking at this game. The actual gameplay is pretty rich too, to an extent. I'm still not entirely sure how I feel about it. On one hand, there's an incredible depth to lock into and learn about, where everything is very thoroughly considered and exists with a satisfyingly consistent internal logic, but also, you can kind of just not engage with it at all. Let me give an example. There's an enemy early in called Tarman, which is just a little monster made out of tar. If you try attacking these guys directly, it won't really do much. Think about it. These guys are made of tar. If you try slicing a sword through tar, it wouldn't be especially effective. In a typical game, this would just equate to the Tarman having high defense. But in Breath of Fire 3, It means you have to think of a way to actually damage tar. Using ice magic on the tar man will always freeze it, because in what context would tar not freeze? And then once it's frozen, standard attacks will start doing more usual damage numbers, because the tar is solid now. That's really cool! It's more alive than a standard rock, paper, scissors RPG strength-weakness dichotomy, and a surprising amount of the enemies have bespoke interactions like this. I suppose why I'm hesitating is because Breath of Fire 3 doesn't quite push this far enough to make it as engaging as it could be. An overwhelming majority of the fights you can still just get through with the tried and true methods of just mashing regular attacks and throwing a couple party buffs or crowd control magic where appropriate. Going through the extra motions to make these interactions happen usually takes more time and ability points than they're worth, and it's a massive shame that engaging with all these thoughtful systems is usually the suboptimal way to play. It does, however, seem like the kind of idea ripe for an indie game to snatch up and push to its natural conclusion. Sure would love to see at least one Breath of Fire 3 inspired indie game in a world slowly filling with Paper Mario clones. Allowing the battles to become so one-note is an especially large problem outside of the fights themselves as well, because oh mama, the dungeons in this game are bad. Like, the rest of the game is so gorgeous and well considered, how did these wind up like this bad? I have not enjoyed my time in a single dungeon in this game, which is awful because there is a lot of them. Just last night I played through a section where there were 2 dungeons back to back without any kind of break in between. It's also usually pretty bad about telegraphing what the goal of the dungeon even is, like what puzzle there is to be solved or what direction progress might look like. They're usually pretty short at least, but the amount of battles thrown at you in them adds to the tedium incredibly quickly. It's a classic RPG pitfall of, here's this puzzle to solve in the dungeon, which exists completely separately from the random battles we keep throwing at you. Good luck remembering what you were doing before the battle started. It might just be me, and thinking about how prevalent this is across the entire genre, it might actually just be me, but bouncing back and forth between these 2 game modes where one requires one way of thinking, and the other just randomly springs time wasters that need a totally separate way of thinking, can feel pretty disorienting. All this on top of, like I said, areas that already do not feel as intuitively designed as other games in the genre. This game loves dungeons, and it loves random battles, and unfortunately that love isn't especially justified here for either of them. Though somehow, despite most of what I'm saying here and playing my experiences has been mostly negative, I still always find myself eager to go back. Why? Can a game really be carried this hard by presentation and nothing else? The music thumps hard, by the way, and the narrative hasn't been especially compelling, but every now and then there will be little pockets of incredibly inspired concepts. I pray that nothing like me is ever born again is one of my new favorite lines of all time from any video game. Breath of Fire 3 might just be a game of chasing these little highs, these little incredible moments where you do need to engage as deeply with the battle system as it wants you to, and where the story does show glimpses of really exciting ideas, all set to the backdrop of a legendary art and sound department. I suppose I'll just have to beat the game and see if any of this changes. So that was about a month ago. And let me get the reply to this. So then, yeah, just last night now, I finished Breath of Fire 3. 14 hours ago, I posted this little post here. So this is December 30th, Breath of Fire 3. Finally finished Breath of Fire 3. Glad to report I'd really turned around on the game. I wouldn't call it a new favorite. I can't help but compare it to Wild Arms, which I also played for the first time this year. And in all aspects but visual, I would consider that a much better game, which I can't tell if that's a hot take or not. But I'm ready to officially advocate for it as a damn good game. Damn good game is all in, the first letters are capitalized, so I, emphasize those. The complaints I initially had with Breath of Fire 3 I think are still valid, though as the game progresses it becomes a lot easier to forgive since it starts picking up in a lot of other areas. One of the biggest issues I had was that the narrative felt childish and inconsequential, which I suspected was on purpose once I realized there was a time skip going from childhood to adulthood. Having now finished the game, yes, it's definitely on purpose. The time skip itself is handled pretty weakly, all of a sudden introducing several majorly plot-relevant elements, all at the same time and expecting you to immediately be on board with how important everyone's saying it all is. But once that's out of the way, Breath of Fire 3 starts playing around with some truly interesting concepts in a surprisingly thoughtful way. Contrasting this against the comparatively juvenile pre-time skip segments, I often find myself thinking things like, man, it's amazing to think that all the people I'm seeing here are the same kids that got up to all those hijinks when they were little. This is something a lot of media, not just games, tries to accomplish, but it's the only time it really resonated with me the way it's supposed to. The way it starts equating gods and machines also got me thinking about quite a few things, both applying to real life as well as fictional settings, but it started taking a different direction than what I was envisioning. It's a good thing it's post-2017 and we have Nier Automata. There's some real clever metaphors in this game though, intentional or not, and it finds ways to start applying several layers of metaphor to each other. I suppose this is the bright side of a localized PS1 RPG using vague language. Whether or not it's what the Japanese script intended, you can start extracting some pretty poignant stuff if you're looking for it. Unfortunately, my problems with the dungeon layouts and battles never quite got resolved. They remain pretty bland all throughout, though at least swapping out party members allows you to start thinking from different directions. A Rei Peko build may as well be a totally different game compared to a Nina Momo build. The issue there comes with how often it forces specific characters into your party for narrative reasons. It felt like half the dungeons required you to either be using Momo or Gar, both of which being the two characters I was the least interested in using. And no, the game forcing them on me did not wind up being clever designed to start getting me to use characters I wouldn't normally use, it just kept reminding me how much I didn't want to use them. I think after a while, I did start getting a little more in the head of whoever was in charge of designing the dungeon maps. There is some kind of internal logic at play there, it's just not quite like the other RPGs I've played. It's hard to tell if I consider this a negative because it's honestly bad, or if it's just not what I'm used to. It still remains true, as of my initial Breath of Fire 3 post, that there is not a single dungeon that I had a good time in. In the end, the narrative pulled me in big time, which if you've read my previous post, you'll know it had quite a lot of work to do in order to achieve this. Aside from the dungeon layouts, the game only continues to get better and better. The music and the art and the story all enter this chain of one-upping itself, and it never stops until the game clear screen. There's a couple segments here and there that hurt the pacing a little, which I was warned about not just in this forum, but also in my real life. It seems like this is something the game is notorious for, though I never felt like it was anything particularly egregious. It'll toss in a few gimmicks here and there that might feel out of place, but in my opinion, they never derail the focus strong enough or long enough to be that much of an issue, except for the bait stuff pre-time skip. That is the single worst part of the game, and it very well may be the reason I was initially so sour towards it. Among every RPG I've played in my life, I'd place this one solidly in B tier. It's a perfect game for a kid growing up near the turn of the century when you only have a few games to pour your entire life into. Tons of secrets, a deep battle system you can get a lot out of if you're willing to put in the effort and pretend like it's worth it to do so, relatively high-minded concepts expressed in a very approachable way. It really is the perfect game for someone like that. I can imagine it shaping someone's worldview the way games like Earthbound did for me when I was young. For a 20-something who's been around the block a few times though, but admittedly not as many times as I'd like, it's simply a damn good game. 8 out of 10. And compared to my initial impressions, that's really saying something. So yeah, Breath of Fire 3 really won me over. It's a good game. That's one I would recommend to some people. I'm not even really sure what kind of person. Just some, you know. Anyways, yeah, that post I made literally 14 hours ago. I don't have any more reviews. Sorry. But seeing as I did start this near, the middle of the summertime, and it's only been getting more frequent since then, I'll definitely have a lot in 2022 to read out loud to you. I'll be posting them on this forum first, obviously, but I'm not going to tell you what forum it is. I don't know. It'd be cool if the forum had more members, but also I really like having a space on the internet that is just like completely separated from everything else I do online. I am about to get on a really big conversation about how like the point of the internet is to be connected, but it's like too connected. So before I get too much on that, I'm going to get the hell out of here. That's my video games. Bye, video games!